What if emptiness at the top isn't a bug? It's a signal. The story high performers tell themselves after a big success can often be a letdown. It can leave them feeling hollow inside and unable to unlock that next level. So we want to try to get ahead of this. So welcome to the People Strategy Forum. I'm Sam Reeve, your host and CEO of CompTeam, and we help organizations design people-centric total rewards that attract and keep top performers. And today's conversation is for leaders who hit the numbers yet feel strangely flat inside. The topic is success without satisfaction, why top performers feel empty, and what to do about it. And we have a special guest today, Max Stevens. He's a high performance coach who's known for helping CEOs, founders, and elite athletes trade external validation for durable fulfillment and impact. Max runs immersive one-on-one coaching, blending deep development work with practical decision frameworks so that high achievers can recalibrate meaning, momentum, and relationships. So if your best people or you are winning on paper but are drifting on purpose, this is a reset that you've been looking for. So welcome, Max.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Yes. And so Max, I know that you sit at the intersection of achievement and meaning and how you help professionals really develop. So what parts of your background really helped shape to where you are today as being a high
Well,
performance coach?
I was sort of lucky. I was lucky slash unfortunate, Sam, that I grew up in a drug addicted household. And basically, there is plenty of literature that draws a very clear consensus that the children of addicts will often internalize the same pain point, which is that if my insert parent, so for me it was my dad, so if my dad had really loved me, he would have been able to get healthy. And because he wasn't able to do that, I must not be lovable. There must be something wrong with me. So if I was better, then maybe he would be able to do X, Y, or Z, right? That pain point plays itself out normally in one of two directions. Either that the child will grow up and seek the confirmation of that belief, so they normally won't amount to very much. They will often be quite self-destructive in some ways because they are essentially saying, see, it's true. I am not lovable. I am not enough. Or they will seek disconfirming evidence of that belief and will say, all right, if I can achieve this, if I can do this, if I can do that, then maybe I will finally be enough and be worthy of my dad's love enough to be able to for him to get clean. And I was just lucky that I fell into the second category. So I had a very, very dysfunctional relationship with success from a very early age because the belief was that I am not okay as I am, and it is only success that will uh, remedy that. That then took me to India. So I went to India when I was about 17, 18. I was in a lot of pain at the time, and I went on a sort of um, school sort of experience right at the end of my last year of school, and we were building a classroom in a very poor area of India down in the south. And I remember I was walking through a slum one day, and there was a guy who was sitting on the side of the road who was very, very clearly homeless. He looked quite malnourished, and he was sitting in a meditative position, and he was crying. And I stopped and I said, "Oh, sir, I didn't mean to disturb you. I just wanted to check if you were okay." And he looked up at me and he said, "Oh, no, 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 I'm completely fine." And I said, "Oh, wow, you speak perfect English." And he said, "Yes, I have been around." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I just wanted to check on you. Like, are you okay? I just saw that you were crying." And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. These are happy tears." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Did you get good news or?" And he said, "No, no, no, not at all." And I said, "So why are you so happy?" And he said, "Because I am." And that never left me. That put a very clear like crack in the my whole frame and epistemic position around what I thought life was supposed to be. Because at the time, at least as I thought it at the time, I said, I'm 17 years old And I already have more than he ever will.
Yeah.
And yet, by the looks of things, he's happier than I'll ever be. And so that then got me very, very interested in how there's not necessarily always a very clear correlation between our inner experience and our outer experience. And so that then moved me into the practice of personal development and meditation. And I was in a terrible amount of pain at the time, considering what I'd sort of gone through and some of the beliefs that I'd sort of picked up about myself. And I was lucky in some ways that I had, and to some degree still have, quite an obsessive personality. And so as I started to meditate more and more, it wasn't like a 20-minute routine here and there. It was like 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. I was obsessed with like trying to get free of whatever this was that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Even as I said it before, Sam, if my dad had really loved me, like I couldn't even articulate that for many years. It was just this sort of pain that was like running the show in the background that I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I remember the day one day very clearly was I was meditating, and it was almost like that belief finally like made itself known to me in a way where there was space between me and the belief. It moved like almost out of my body and presented itself to me, which was, if my dad had really loved me, he would have been able to get healthy. And I remember for the first time, I could actually ask myself, is this actually true? So, and I could actually unpack it. And I said, okay, if my dad had really loved me, he would have been able to get healthy. Okay, well, Max, just notice that your dad has struggled with addiction since long before you were born, right? Since he was 20, like, and so just because you're now around, and that must mean that he needs to do or not do certain things. When I started to unpack it, it seemed quite childish, and which would also make sense because it was a belief that I picked up from when I was really young. And so I could start to pull it apart in ways that I couldn't before. And I asked myself, well, okay, if and now I may not be ready to admit this, but if it wasn't true, what would the implications of that be? And one of the implications, and I said this out loud at the time, is I said that I am lovable. And in that moment, it was like a lightning bolt hit my nervous system, and I could feel it like start to recalibrate itself. And in that moment, I was free. And what also became very, very clear to me, because at the time I was doing a lot of high performance work with a lot of athletes, it became inescapably clear on the other side of integrating that experience that, you're doing the same thing. Like you're compensating for your own sort of emotional pain in your own way. The content might be different, but the context is the same. And not only that, but our culture sort of validates and reinforces that compensatory strategy by saying that, look how driven they are, look how focused they are, look how disciplined they are. But it's a mistake because it's not drive or focus or discipline. It's compensation. They are compensating for some sort of emotional pain that they have. And so that then moved me into that was the start of what moved me into the work that I'm doing today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that story, Max. I mean, it's very touching. I mean, I think about addiction. And I was just doing some reading up on this because I'm getting ready to do a training for the National Ski Patrol on helping them refresh on their outdoor emergency care. And one of the topics is opioid addiction. And I was shocked by the definition that I read the other day. It says those that are on opioid addiction often end in death, and and uh, and just that factor right there is something that grips a person so deeply that they cannot attend to life's basic needs is just shocking. And I know that I'm not sure, of course, of the addiction that you're referring to, but it can definitely grip quite deeply. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. But one thing that I would love to dig into a bit is that this overachievement, as you mentioned, or this drive for achievement, and to almost this extreme level, and then also the other side, as you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, such as those that feel like they self-sabotage themselves from success or deal with imposter syndrome to such an extent that they cannot perform or they feel like they're not worthy. Is that the types of things that you're helping these leaders and elite athletes overcome?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely something we can dive into together.
Yeah. As we're looking at these things, what happens in a person's mind of a high achieving leader who finally achieves that goal, and then they have this letdown? I have to tell you another story too, because another thing that just happened with another speaker earlier, and they were telling me about how they were going on this journey to climb this mountain, and they've been working on it for 3 years and training and so forth. And they got to the top, and then they felt exactly what you're describing.
Hmm.
This sense of letdown. What's next? What's next in my life? And they felt a deep sense of loss. And I'm just thinking about that and just now as you mentioned success.
Yes. Okay, so we have to lay some groundwork to be able to get a really effective answer to this question. But the first axiom that we can lean on is that human beings do not interface with reality. We interface with the meanings that we associate with reality. So because we have advanced cognition and advanced language, right, is I don't interface directly with the external world. I create meanings about what things mean to me based on my aims and history and so on and so forth. So like the classic example is, if you're if you said you were going to meet your partner at dinner, right, at 7 o'clock at the restaurant, you turn up at 7 o'clock and he or she isn't there. Like, what's the first thing that you would think? And you might say, I don't know, is she okay? I hope something hasn't happened. Another person might think, she must be mad at me, right? Or he must be mad at me. That's why he's late. Another person might think, that's so disrespectful. How could they disrespect our time together like this? So, like, you can have the same phenomenon, but different experiences of that phenomenon. Now, why does that matter? Because if we can grasp this, right, then what the challenge for the high performer is that the high performer's journey is normally born of pain. It is normally born of pain or some sort of feeling of inadequacy or insignificance. I don't feel significant as I am. I don't feel enough as I am, in whatever way that manifests itself. And so what happens is the high performer is stuck in a bind that they themselves are not even conscious of. That what they are actually seeking, and they don't even realize this, they're not even seeking achievement. They're not even seeking the attainment of goals. They're not seeking more revenue. They're not seeking to be number one. They're not even seeking to be a winner. What they are seeking is the end of that feeling. That's what they're actually seeking. And what happens is that they go on this external journey, i.e., to become CEO, to win a gold medal, to whatever, to allay or experience relief from that feeling.
Mm.
And so what happens is as they go on this journey and they get their first promotion, they win their first deal, they close their first contract, they make their first million, they whatever it is, right? Insert whatever goal. If any of your listeners are listening, just insert whatever the next goal is for you. And what happens is when they achieve, right, that goal in the external world, that feeling that they have internalized temporarily goes into abeyance. It temporarily leaves them, right? And they go, "Oh, that's nice. That's better. That feels a lot more relieving." But the problem is that because the true like underscoring fracture hasn't been dealt with, what happens is in a couple of minutes or a couple of hours or a couple of days, that emotional fracture then reconvenes itself back in their body. And they go, maybe that's just because I haven't achieved this yet. And so they're caught in this game where they're seeking an external outcome to allay or find peace from an internal pain point. And that can never happen. And that is why they are just caught in this game because it's like Pavlov's dog who salivates on the wrong bell. And so that gives us very good cause, and very good ground to begin unpacking this together.
So is it the thought that they're constantly chasing that external validation without knowing that the actual thing that they're chasing is within? Is that
Yes, that's exactly right. Like, that's exactly right. The only reason, like, let me put it to you like this. They wouldn't be so driven if every time they achieved something, that feeling got worse.
Yeah.
Like the reason why they are driven is because they believe on some level, like I did, they believe on some level that if I get this, whatever this is, then this internal feeling that I'm stuck with, yeah, won't will leave me. Yeah. And that provides a very, very, very potent source of motivation. Because if I'm not okay as I am, right, then rest and being with myself and being by myself and all that sort of stuff, like that's like my worst nightmare. And that's often what high performers report to me. It's like I feel very guilty when I rest. I can't go on holidays, all that sort of stuff because, I want to win the game, whatever that means for them. But they're caught in this game and they don't even realize it. And that's why they constantly achieve the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and never feel satisfied. It's because you're looking in the wrong place for an answer. You need to look inside you, not outside you.
So Max, in part of your journey, the answer to this identity work was extensive meditation.
Right.
Is that the path for everyone, or are there other paths?
Um, the path is found in some sort of contemplative practice because it requires like turning our attention off the external world into what is actually going on inside of me. So whether that takes the form of meditation, coaching work, whatever, but there's an internal emotional fracture that is playing itself out, yeah, where a strategy is formed for that high performer, which is now distorting their experience. And so that fracture has to get dealt with.
Okay. But the first step of this is really identifying that that is the issue. I mean, so what are the key signals that a leader can take to saying that maybe the real true answer to satisfaction is internal, not external? What is the early warning system that they can?
Well, I think that what I had this conversation with I was about a year ago now, but I was running this sort of intensive for about 45 different CEOs in a room. And one of the things that we were sort of discussing is I said, just notice that when you started your business, you would have killed somebody to be in the position that you're in now. And you're no happier now than you were before. So, like, that should tell you something. Yeah, like that should tell you something. It's like we've got to see eventually that the strategy is not working. Yeah. And so there's a deeper point to this, Sam, which I'll get to now. So okay, so we have to understand something is that human beings are animals and there is biological wiring that exists within all of us, right? And contrary to our contemporary cultural narrative, we are not as unique as we would all like to claim, right? We are biological machines and there is, right? Hot take here, there is a proper way to run this machine, right? Like any other machine. Here's the thing to understand. Anywhere from tens to hundreds of thousands of years, like the beginning of human history is sort of contended, but whatever. Let's just say it's on the shorter side. So tens of thousands of years. So for tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in tribes in the forest. And your quote unquote success measure wasn't found in obviously how much money you had. It wasn't found in your achievements. It was found in the contribution that you made to that tribe.
Hmm.
Did you go and get those berries? Did you go and catch that fish? Did you go and hunt that animal? And if you did, you would bring back your spoils and you would be celebrated within your tribe, right? That worked all well and good until these tribes grew in size and we had tribal warfare where these tribes would start to encroach on one another's territory. What eventually happened is that these larger tribes evolved into city states, which was basically like really, really basic trade. So, Sam, you've got some sheepskin, I've got some eggs. You want the eggs and I want the sheepskin. Why don't we swap? So we had like real sort of basic trade. That again worked fine, essentially up until the Industrial Revolution. And post-Industrial Revolution, we had a surplus of goods, right? We had a surplus of material comfort and goods, right? And so that left the quote unquote powers that be with a very interesting question, which is okay, now we've got more than enough for everybody. How do we start to convince people to buy more than what they actually need? Right. And so began the rise of advertising. And so now, like in 2025, like trade is no longer done on the basis of utility, right? Trade is now done on the basis of identity. So what I mean by that is that now we don't buy the thing because I need the thing. We buy the thing because of what it means about me to own that thing. So like a really great example is like let's take like a luxury item like a Gucci scarf, right? So like I don't buy that scarf because it's more warm than another scarf. I buy that scarf because of what it means about me to own it. It says that I'm sophisticated, it says that I'm elegant, I guess. It says that I'm successful, right? So I'm not buying the thing. I'm buying the story about what it means about me to own it. That is fine. However, what happens is that when next year's scarf is released, that same scarf that I bought now no longer says elegance or sophistication or success. Now it says that I'm falling behind,
Hmm.
and yet it's the same scarf. And so what happens is we're leaping the story of success, right, is not fixed to an item. It leaps from item to item. And this is like the basis of consumer culture. And so what happens is the high performer is validated externally for this emotional pain that they have, right? And then not only that, but is also can also not all of them are, but certainly a vast majority of them are very also concerned with what other people think about me and my image. And so it's terrible. It's an emotional pain point that plays itself out where they have a dysfunctional relationship with success that is then validated by our consumer culture, which then allows them to also get caught in that second trap. And so they're just caught in this maze and web, that it can't even really be solved. It can only be propagated. And so there's normally one of two things that ends up breaking this frame. Number one is a health crisis. So this is like the classic story of like the CEO who has a heart attack in the boardroom or something like that. So their health gives out or their marriage gives out and they lose their family because they're never home and never emotionally present and so on and so forth. And so it's normally one of those two things that ends up splintering that whole frame because now it cannot be ignored. It cannot continue to be propagated because of what they end up giving up on the other side, i.e., with their health or with their family.
Yeah, so that definitely can bring awareness, but then now that leader is left either they're alone in their home with that sense of emptiness, or they have that loss of their health where they realize that, hey, if I don't have this, I have nothing.
Correct. It's a shame, but it is that classic quote, when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And it's often, certainly in my experience working with now hundreds and hundreds of high performers, it's often those two things, one of those two things that plays out. Their body gives out or their family gives out.
Okay. So now I guess you're in a situation where that leader is at a low point in their life, and this is where you often find people are reaching out to you.
Yes, and I always find myself thinking, Sam, if only you'd found me a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
but it's often the case.
So now a person's in a very vulnerable state. How do you build them up from there and get them back on track?
So I often have them track through how they got here and what the warning signs were, because it's often the case that they come to me quite surprised and how could this happen and so on and so forth. But actually, when they go back and look, it's just that there were certain warning signs that they ignored. And so like being able to identify these and also just understanding that in the grander sort of evolutionary scheme of things, it is often the case that our current stage of development needs to become a net negative before we move on. So there's often a process of forgiving oneself, recognizing the shortness of one's life, and sort of engaging with things with radical honesty. Because the thing is, like particularly in Australia, like if they end up losing half of their wealth, if not more, it's sort of they get in this question of like, why was I doing all of that? Like, why did I even begin? Like, that was a stupid life decision. Like my whole orientation was just wrong. And that then opens up questions about, okay, well, what is a better way to live? And so that then opens up conversations about the next chapter of their lives.
Hmm. And are there, I mean, I know that you coach a variety of different leaders, I mean, from CEOs to athletes to artists. Is there similarities or patterns that appear across these different professions?
Yep, absolutely. So that compensatory fracture that they are compensating for, that is all the same. that is often the same. It's just that it plays itself out in sort of different ways. Like this is the thing that I have said many times to clients, often jokingly, but the thing that is unique about the human animal is that we all think our problems are really unique, and they're so not, like there's one of the analogies that I draw on is like, if you take any other species, even if you take like, I don't know, dogs, dogs are dogs. They might have different personalities, even I suppose different preferences to some degree, but they're all still dogs. And so what do dogs need? And it's like walks, play, food, affection. It's like you deny any dog this and the dog suffers. And human beings are much the same. We have a need for connection, for contribution, for community, for feeling connected to something bigger than myself, and so on and so forth. And whether they're an artist or an athlete or whatever, it's like I said, the content might be different, but the context is the same.
Hmm. Yeah. And I notice that sometimes we think that we're talking a lot with overachievement or really focusing on work, but I often see that play itself out with even very, very altruistic people that give and give and give until they have nothing left, and they too seem to be victim of this behavior. Do you see that side of things as well?
Um, it's probably just a comment on the nature of the people that I work with, but not often. Like, so the one of the questions that I get asked sometimes is, okay, Max, like I get all of that, but are you telling me that there's no such thing as someone as a healthy high performer? Like, how do you tell the difference between these two things? And so, like the tell for me is pretty clear, which is that it comes down to like so. Okay, so all right, again, let's lay some groundwork here. So, one of the things that I've often been quite shocked by, Sam, like with a lot of people that I've worked, not necessarily with, but just conversations that I've had with other coaches, personal development practitioners, etc. And I've asked them, what exactly is the point of personal development? Like, what's the point? Like, is it different for everybody, or is this something that we're all sort of working towards? Like, what's the point? And like, if we're developing ourselves, what are we supposed to be developing ourselves into?
Hmm.
And often other people in my space will say, oh, like kicking goals and, you know, becoming the best version of ourselves and, like being a winner and that sort of thing. It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. Like personal development began originally, like the original personal development is philosophy, and philosophy always speaks to the same sort of principle, which is that the point of philosophy is what's referred to as self-transcendence, which is the idea that there is a better part of me, like virtues, like say Aristotelian virtues or vices, and there's part of me that is, selfish. So there's one part of me that's selfless, one part of me that is selfish. And hopefully, what is happening is if we are really developing ourselves, we are becoming more and more selfless. If we look at theological texts like anywhere from the Bible to the Bhagavad Gita to Buddhist texts, it speaks to the same idea. Like you're supposed to become one with God or enter the kingdom of heaven or move away from selfishness and do good deeds and so on and so forth. So again, like it speaks to the same idea. When we look at modern day developmental psychology and we look at one of the things that we look at within stages of development within modern developmental psychology is circles of concern. So where does your circle of concern start and end? At lower stages of development, right? It's basically like my circle of concern stops and ends at me. So it's like if it affects me, then it concerns me. If it doesn't affect me, then it doesn't concern me. That then normally spreads to me and my family, me and my family, my friends, my community, my countries, all people within all countries, all cultures and animals and nature within all countries, and so on. So we can tell, like, it's a very clear tell around someone's level of development, which is basically like, where does their circle of concern end? And so the principle or the journey that I sort of go on with these high performers is once they have forgiven and integrated those emotional fractures, the irony is that they actually become more successful than they were before.
Yeah.
But because they are now no longer attempting to heal themselves through the acquisition of achievement, but they are attempting to, like we spoke about with the tribes, where they're attempting to contribute powerfully to the world, because it's now no longer about healing my pain, but about trying to make the world better. And the irony is when they do that and they actually show up in that space, like everybody wants to work with them and they often, build the next business faster than they did before, earn more than they did before, but it doesn't mean the same thing to them anymore. And that's really like the culmination of their journey. So, in terms of being able to distinguish healthy and unhealthy high performers, like a compensatory high performance behavior is essentially about me, and healthy high performance behavior is essentially about attempting to contribute. Now, we've got to be careful because there are plenty of high performers that I've spoken to, and they go, "Oh yeah, no, I'm definitely in the second category," but it's often just because they haven't introspected deeply enough.
I see. So let's dig into what you mentioned there as far as being successful. What is the definition of success? Now, is that aligned with the roles that we play? As you mentioned, as you were talking about community, you were talking about family, and so we have many roles, such as a spouse, a father, a sibling, a worker, a leader. So there's success in each one of those. Do we need to be truly successful? Do we need to find some sort of balance in all those different roles?
I think where my mind goes, as I said, if we integrate all of these different sort of epistemologies and schools of thought, like the apex of human development is selflessness.
Hmm.
Like the more selfless we are, the more that's the thing that we're all aiming at, is to is to basically move away from like me and my base level petty concerns into attempting to contribute to something bigger than me, whether that takes place in a family or a community or so on and so forth. That's what we're all sort of working towards. I actually do believe that there is a point to life and a point to personal development and a point to business. Like even notice like the business only exists, that business that pays you millions of dollars, only exists because it contributes powerfully to others. There's an interdependence that we have. Human beings are tribal, communal animals. Like where we co-regulate one another. And so what we are all in the collective game of is pursuing that sort of apex of, even if you think about, I know it's a little bit dated, but even if you think about like the hierarchy of needs, right? So and the apex of that sort of hierarchy of needs is self-transcendence. It is selflessness.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah, I often think about, and I like the what you mentioned as far as the contribution to others and so forth. Often think of business as kind of like a three-legged stool. I mean, we have our customers that we're focused on, but for us to be able to give them great service, we need to ensure that our coworkers, our employees, are delivering them great service. And then to ensure that our employees are healthy and successful and secure, we need to make sure that we have a strong company. And so all the mixture of all those three things together can really drive performance and security and create an ecosystem to where all can be successful. So would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, I would agree with that. I think that the challenge within so one of the things that I say is that the chokehold of any business is always found in the owner's personal psychology,
Hmm.
right? So outcomes within a business are driven by behavior. So the behaviors that we engage in create the outcomes. Our behaviors are driven by our decisions. So what do I decide to do moment to moment? Our decisions are driven by our thinking. So as in the patterns of thoughts that are available to me at any given point in time. And our thinking is driven by our worldview. So, and our worldview by its very nature is often invisible to those who live inside it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I have spoken often about with more sort of disagreeable CEOs who say like, I'm a little bit skeptical about this work or, whatever, is I'll say, okay, well just notice, right, that when you look out at the world and you look out at your team and people in your business and so on and so forth, can you see that like people are their own worst problem? They get in their own way in some way, they deceive themselves in some way, they're caught in some story about themselves, and they'll go, oh yeah, definitely. And I'll go, right. And then when you look throughout human history and you see all of the craziness that we have done to each other, all in the name of believing that we were doing good, we clearly have a propensity to deceive ourselves. Oh, yes, definitely. Right. And if we bring this closer to home, if you think about your kids and your partner and your parents, can you see that they get in their own way in some way? And they'll go, yep. And I go, right, but not you.
Mm.
And I'll say, so how did you get so lucky that you were the only person who was transparent to themselves? And so it's like the challenge for business owners, I believe, is that business owners will misdiagnose their own personal development problems as business problems,
Ah,
right? So, so it's never the case. Like, and that's what I mean. Like, business owners come to me quite often because they are wanting some sort of outcome. We want to double the revenue. We want to this, we want to that. And I'll go, right, and what's the problem? And they'll say, well, I'm just really struggling like maintaining peak performance. And I'll go, and then I'll sort of pause and ask them, so tell me, like, why do you even want this goal? Like, you could have come to me for anything, but like doubling the revenue is the thing, right? And they'll go, well, so I could prove to all those people who said that I couldn't do it that I can. And I'll say, well, don't you think a better use of our time together is just to forgive those people? Because then you wouldn't have to do this at all. And so, like, they are engaged in, or rather, they have a dysfunctional relationship with their own motivation, which is why they feel they need a coach in the first place, right? But the thing that they don't understand is the reason why they have dysfunctional motivation is because the ground that they are building this goal on is itself dysfunctional. They are trying to prove or compensate for, some sort of experience that they have had which has been painful. And that creates like this like roller coaster of motivation, which is like when I'm resting, I think about those people and it gets me back into work, but like I find the work very tiresome and I'm not really aligned with it. But then if I stop working, then they will write. So like they're just caught in this game that they can't quite articulate. And I suppose the intersection of those two things is where my work sort of sits.
hmm. Yeah, it's a very important work for sure. So as we're thinking about leaders, it sounds like we need to uh, pull back. We need to refocus on what's truly important. We need to think about what's really going to make a difference in not just our lives, but those that depend on us, those around us that are relying upon us. Let's make this just a little bit more personal as far as what do you think is the key thing that leaders out there listening in right now should be focusing on as the key point or the keystone of this conversation?
Forgiveness,
Forgiveness.
definitely, definitely, without a doubt. Forgiveness like clears up your motivational system. So all of the things, it's like gunk in the machine.
And so I imagine when we're talking about forgiveness, we've been talking a lot about introspection and some of that key person that you need to forgive. Is that the leader itself or
Yeah.
yourself person?
It will in the end it will be about yourself. But no, it's often forgiving some sort of experience because it is that experience that often turns you into a high performer in the first place.
I see. Yeah. So identifying that is a key factor.
That is definitely the way, particularly for leaders if they struggle to stop, like if they struggle to take breaks, if they struggle to be with their family, if they struggle to be still, you can tell what is it? You can tell the level of one's development if you can lock them in a room with no stimulation for a couple of hours and they just have to sit with themselves.
Mm,
It's like those of us who are on the, what would you say, who have a little bit more work to do would find that torture.
yeah. Well, we've learned a lot in this conversation. Success without satisfaction is solvable. It's something that you can help leaders on
Definitely.
the path to recovery. And so for those leaders that are listening in that want to start this journey, what's their best way to get a hold of you, Max?
If they want to, just come to maxstevenscoaching.com. Stevens is spelled with a PH. And yeah, just come and have a chat with me.
Well, thanks, Max. I mean, truly for giving high performers out there a little bit of light on maybe refocusing their life before they have that downfall, sense of realization, as you mentioned, when they've lost everything. So hopefully, some of those leaders listening in can catch themselves before they have to go through that tough journey and start life anew with your help. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
All right. And for all our listeners out there, if this has helped, please share this conversation with a colleague that needs this type of guidance. Also, subscribe and rate and